you, Dr. Dr. Tony Bates, we are eager to learn more about your thoughts and insights regarding the role of open universities in a post-COVID world. The floor is yours. You can introduce yourself, and at your convenience, you can start sharing your presentation.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm greatly honored to be able to be invited to do this. I apologize, I can't speak in Turkish, and I really appreciate you all having to listen to me in English and ask me questions in English. I really do appreciate that. I'm going to switch to my presentation. I want to talk about the role of open universities post-COVID, and particularly the future of open universities. And to do that, I want to say a little bit about myself because it's relevant to the discussion. I was one of the founding staff at the Open University in Britain when it opened in it didn't open until 1971. I was appointed as a research officer in 1969 to study distance education in preparation for the opening of the Open University in Britain. I worked there for 20 years. I was a professor in the end of educational media research. And then I left to become director of distance education and technology at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Now, UBC is a very traditional campus-based research university. It's one of the top universities in North America, but it had also been offering distance education since about 1935, mainly to teachers around the province. I worked there for 8 years and helped them develop their first online programs. Then I took mandatory retirement at 65, and since then I've been a consultant on digital learning. And I've had experience at many different open universities, the Open University of Catalonia, Universidade de Alberta in Portugal, the Open University of the Netherlands, the Open University of Hong Kong, and I've worked in as a consultant in several dual mode institutions, including polytechnics. So I've got a fairly broad overview of open and distance learning in terms of the different kinds of institutions that are teaching it. So what I want to do in my presentation is very briefly discuss online and open distance learning before COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19, which you're probably more familiar with than I am, but I want to just draw some lessons from COVID-19, especially about access and equity to online learning, and the lack of quality that was apparent in many of the emergency remote learning that took place during COVID-19, and what that implies for online learning in particular following COVID. And that leads into the discussion of the purpose of open universities. What makes open universities distinct from other universities, and what are the future direction for open universities as I see it in an increasingly competitive world? So that's what I want to talk about. And some of these things I know that many of you will know more in detail about any one of the things I'm talking about, but I just want to put it all together as a package to see what it looks like. And in the first part, I'm going to end with these questions, and I hope that you will provide your own answers to these questions in the chat session, and then we can discuss them at the end of the part one of my talk. And in particular for Turkey, are campus-based universities moving more into online and distance learning, especially after COVID?
Dr. Tony Bates, sorry for interrupting your conversation. You can share the slide. We cannot see now.
You can't see them?
Yeah, yeah, you need to share it.
I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry. Can you see them now?
Yeah.
Right. Well, those are the first ones I went through. What I want to discuss at the end of the first section, I'd like to have your responses to these questions. Are campus-based universities moving more into online distance learning after COVID? Are there other competitors to open universities, such as private online learning companies? That's particularly the case in the United States at the moment. Are campus-based universities in Turkey moving to blended learning, a mix of online and face-to-face? And has the acceptance of online learning increased or decreased in Turkey because of emergency remote learning? So I'm giving you sort of forewarning of these questions because I'm going to be discussing them at the end of this part. If we look at online learning before COVID hit in 2020, in North America, online learning was growing rapidly across all higher education institutions. It was increasing at a rate of 10% per annum, and it had been increasing at that rate for nearly 10 years. In the United States, 1 in every 3 higher education students takes at least one online course for credit. And in Canada, 93% of all universities and 85% of all 2-year colleges offered some online courses as well as their campus-based teaching. And we have a couple of open universities in Canada, you probably know, Athabasca University in Alberta, but it's a national open university, and a francophone open university called TELUC in Quebec. And interestingly, over this 10-year period, their enrollments have been static. They have not been growing. They have been losing students to the conventional universities offering online courses. Most universities offering online courses in Canada before COVID were using learning management systems, and synchronous online learning was growing before COVID. About 2/3 of universities and colleges were using synchronous stream video as well as a learning management system, but it was mainly to supplement a learning management system. What happened with COVID, of course, is that this became the main means of delivery for many universities who never used online learning before. Now, I don't know if it was the same in Turkey, I think it was, but in Canada, all institutions went online in March 2020, in less than 2 weeks. This was amazing because people have thought of universities as very static and not able to adapt and so on, yet 100,000 instructors went online in 2 weeks. That was mainly because of the technology was easy for them to use. They didn't have to adapt their teaching methods very much. They could just use them, continue them using stream lectures, using technologies such as Zoom. But more importantly, what has happened over the 2 years, at least in Canada, has been a massive training of instructors in online teaching. Instructors realized often they weren't doing very well with their online lectures, and at Centers for Teaching and Learning, who had experience of online learning, as I said, 93% of our universities were already using online learning before COVID. They were able to work with instructors who came, in the past, it was very hard to get instructors to do professional development. About 10% of all instructors, and often the same to 10%, pre-COVID would go to the Centers of Teaching and Learning for help with their teaching. But during COVID, the numbers increased enormously. So there's been a lot of development in training of faculty in North America and using online learning. And what we see then, post-COVID, here is my prediction. This is a prediction. The figures up to 2020 are accurate. They're based on surveys. And you'll see that about 25 to 30% of all online enrollments were fully online. and about 15% were in blended courses. Now, we will see an uptick, we will see an increase as a result of COVID in fully online courses, but there is a limit. There's a specific market for fully online learning, as you probably know, in Turkey, and it's mainly lifelong learners and people in the workforce who want to come back and get more qualifications, and students often in their final year who want to take extra courses so they can complete in 4 years in Canada. But what we will see is a huge increase in blended and hybrid learning. Most instructors now know that some things can be done just as well online, and other things are probably, in their view, better done face-to-face. So what I see happening is that in maybe 10 years' time, nearly all teaching will be either fully online, but more likely a mix of online and face-to-face. So here are my questions, which I gave you earlier, and I'm hoping, Ari, you can give me these questions from the chat. Are campus-based universities moving more into online distance learning in Turkey now? Are there other competitors? Are campus-based universities moving to blended learning in Turkey? And has the acceptance of online learning increased or decreased because of emergency remote learning? Have you got any answers to those questions yet?
I see some comments and some responses. Let me read some of the comments for your presentation. It is interesting now, some of the attendees on YouTube channel are international ones, and I think his name is Gazi. Gazi, he says, COVID-19 gave me opportunity to register Anadolu University Open Education System, and Murat Ünal raised a question: do you have data on the success results of online education that have been evaluated? But I think we have a lot of empirical data proving the effectiveness of online education. Erdem Erdoğdu responded number 3. He says, we can say that blended courses increased after COVID-19 in Turkey. And it has been quite popular, actually.
I can answer the question on the data. Before COVID-19, there were a lot of meta-analyses of the different of student performance in online courses or face-to-face. And generally, the overall result was no significant difference. However, that doesn't mean to say that they were more or less successful. It's just that there's so much variation in both face-to-face teaching and its quality and in online learning and its quality that they tended to cancel each other out. If you looked at a system, like say the higher education system in one of our
more or less successful. It's just that there's so much variation in both face-to-face teaching and its quality and in online learning and its quality that they tended to...
Sorry, I was getting feedback there.
Yeah.
If we look at one of the systems like Ontario, overall they found that the completion rates in online learning were about between 5 to 10% lower than they were for face-to-face courses. And that wasn't so much to do with online learning, it's the fact that most students doing online learning were part-time students. And so the different, when you control for part-time students, there was no difference. So it was the part-time nature of online learning rather than online learning itself. During COVID-19, similar results were found, although the differences were slightly larger. They were more like 10 to 15% in terms of student performance. But again, that would vary quite a bit. And I would have thought they would have been much higher, I must admit, given the quality of a lot of the emergency remote learning. So it did drop a bit, but not by an enormous amount. And I think that's more to do with the determination and motivation of students as it was to do with the quality of the teaching. I think students tried very hard during COVID and worked very hard. Many were stressed out. There was a lot of reports on stress, but their performance wasn't that much lower than it had been in their face-to-face courses before COVID. But there were, again, this varied considerably depending on the kind of courses that were offered. And this is Canada, where we already had quite a high level of online learning before COVID. It might be very different in other countries where there wasn't a lot of online learning in universities before. So I think it depends on the circumstances, again, as always with educational research.
Dr. Tony Bates, there are some responses. Would you like me to read you, or would you like to go over
just
them?
a couple more, and then I'll move on to the next part.
Okay. Erdem Erdoğdu says, in Turkey, remote distance education services increased after COVID-19. I think this is a pattern similar to all around the world. And Hasan Uçar says, private initiatives are less than expected. Actually, the initiatives regarding online education and blended learning are mostly state institutions. Abdullah Cycle says there is a widespread skepticism on the quality of emergency distance education in Turkey. However, number of courses delivered in blended hybrid mode has increased greatly. I'm not sure, though, if the adaptation will continue. And Serpil Koçtar finally says, after COVID-19, Anadolu University face-to-face education system moved to blended education. We have 40% of our courses online and 30% of the weekly lessons online in a course. And this is the last comment I will read. Dr. Elif Toprak says, the interest for face-to-face conventional courses increased, as well as there is a psychological dimension here. So the trend is more towards blended learning nowadays. And to wrap up this section, I can tell that what I see in Turkey, those who were not believing online distance education or distance education were defending online distance education, because in a sudden overnight, it really became a popular mode of education. And hybrid and blended learning, maybe it's a buzzword. I mean, we are not sure how people see blended learning, but it has become quite popular all around Turkey. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, I think the two big lessons I drew from the experience of COVID-19, we've always thought of online learning and distance learning as increasing access. But that's when there was a choice. When there's a choice between going on campus or going online, then it often increases access because some students can't go on campus and they take online courses. What we found during COVID, when there was no choice, quite a lot of students couldn't access online learning. Now in Canada, we have a fairly advanced system of telecommunications, but up to 25% of students had inadequate access to online learning during COVID. This is university students, it was higher in schools. There were three reasons. Some students lived in remote areas where they didn't have good internet access outside of the nearest town where the university campus was. So if they lived outside the town where the campus was, they didn't have good internet access. The poor people, very low income people, often couldn't afford either the equipment, a computer and so on, or the high internet costs that the telecom companies charge in Canada. And another issue that hadn't come to the fore before was that many of our students are in crowded accommodation with multiple users. They may be 6 or 8 people in the house, all using technology at the same time. So when they came to download their Zoom lectures, there wasn't enough bandwidth because everybody else, the kids were using it for school Mother and father were using it for work, and then a student was trying to grab some bandwidth to get their Zoom lectures. And of course, Zoom lectures demand much more bandwidth than a learning management system. It's about 3 or 4 times the bandwidth for a Zoom lecture than using a learning management system. And that was Canada. We know that the problem was much greater in many other countries. And that raised the question for me, should open universities that are meant to be for everyone, is online a viable way of delivering programs, given the number of students who probably can't access online learning? So I think that's a question. I'm not sure how you're responding to that question at Anadolu, but I think it's a question that's come up quite a bit for a number of our universities here, that we weren't really aware that this is such a problem for some students. So at Anadolu, do you have many online courses? Is internet and equipment access an issue for your students? If it is, why is it still important to offer online courses? I think there are good arguments why you should offer online courses, even if a lot of students don't have easy access at home. And is there a strategy for online and digital learning in the future? In particular, do you have a strategy for dealing with students who may not have effective access to online learning? So I'll give the audience a bit of a chance to jot down their thoughts on this. I will move on to the next question, but perhaps you can come back when we come to the next session with some of the comments on these questions. The second lesson was the lack of quality in emergency remote learning. There were often 6 synchronous lectures. Some students were getting 6 hours a day of stream lectures. Basically, their classroom lectures were just moved online. It was as if they were attending campus, but were in fact at home watching their computer screens. And the research showed that a lot of students suffered from cognitive overload. They couldn't accommodate all the information. And it wasn't just cognitive overload. The instructors were often concerned that the students wouldn't learn everything through the lectures, so they gave them a lot of extra online work as well. So the students had too much work as a result, much more than they would have done in a face-to-face class. There was a considerable lack of student engagement. All most instructors could do, this is not a criticism of the instructors in 2020. There was no time to learn. They didn't have the chance to do good quality online learning. So this is not a criticism of the instructors. However, in 2022, I'm not sure that's the case. I think we should be doing synchronous online learning a lot better now, and we should be making it more educationally effective. But I don't think it's going to go away. I think synchronous streamed lectures are here to stay. I think the issue is, how do we make them of high quality? And in particular, how do we integrate them with asynchronous online learning? So I think we can learn from emergency remote learning. I think we have learned that there is a value in online synchronous learning, especially when it's done well. For many instructors, this is an easy stepping stone into online learning. So it gets them involved, and then we can do what many of our centers for teaching and learning do, grab hold of them and show them how online learning should be done properly. 2 years of training has improved the way we do online synchronous learning. What we need to do is to identify the affordances of synchronous online learning. What does it do better than synchronous online learning? And also, in turn, identify the affordances of asynchronous. They both have value. So the challenge now is, how do we use them together in the best possible way? without overloading the students, of course. Now, what is interesting is that, as you're well aware, before COVID, we'd had over 30 years of prior experience, research, and best practices in teaching online. And very little of that was applied during emergency remote learning. There just wasn't a chance to do both. So what we need to do is to apply the lessons from online learning pre-pandemic and the lessons learned during the pandemic for future online teaching and learning. We have to learn from both. And this raises for me the question of the purpose of open universities. I believe that open universities are facing an existential threat. Online and distance and blended learning are becoming core components of all university teaching. If that's the case, what then is the unique selling points today of open universities? What makes them different? And that means we need to look at the mission and the reasons for open universities. And I'm sure most of you know what these are, but I do want to go through a particular viewpoint about open universities. I mentioned I started work at the Open University in 1969. I went to the official opening of the university, and the first chancellor of the university was a man called Lord Crowther. And he gave a very short speech, you can still see it online, which very much resonated with me. He said, open universities should be open to people, tapping the great unused reservoir of human talent and potential. This was at a time when in Britain, only 8% of students leaving school went on to higher education. So there were a lot of people out there who were very intelligent, had great potential, but weren't getting into universities. Open to places, disembodied and airborne. He was talking about technology here. Broadcasting particularly was seen as a major way of delivering open university programs. But he recognized it wasn't just broadcasting, it will be print, radio, and other technologies will be used. And obviously technologies that weren't invented then in '69, like the internet. Open to methods. Every new form of human communication will be examined to see how it can be used to raise and broaden the level of human understanding. And lastly, open to ideas. The human mind as a fire to be set alight. Those were his words, not mine. And I think that's a uplifting view of an open university, what its purpose is. And I want to discuss each of those in a little bit more detail. People. What open universities have traditionally done has served those that are not served well by the conventional university systems. And that's usually the poor, the disadvantaged, minorities, the handicapped, and those who went through school but never got to a regular university and may have regretted it later. Lifelong learners, if you like. And increasingly, of course, people who have graduated but need further training and education, but the regular university system isn't flexible enough to handle them. And that means, I think, for most open universities, open or easier admission than to a regular university. As the Vice Chancellor of the British Open University said, we are open to anyone, but graduates have to qualify. In other words, you qualify through your degree, not through your admission, not through your school exams. Better human support services for students. Often universities aren't very good at giving that kind of personal support that students often need, not just academic, but also personal support. And if you're dealing with the poor, the handicapped, and disadvantaged, you need to have really good human support services in place so those students can succeed. And lastly, help with technology through learning centers or learning spaces where if students don't have good internet access or can't afford it, there's somewhere local they can go to and access your programs. Another way is through equipment loan to students and particularly training students in how to use technology. Again, many of the students coming to an open university will not be tech savvy and will need help with that. Space. Well, one of the things I think open universities could do is to flip the blended model. The blended model is primarily face-to-face with some online learning. What you might want to do as an open university is to be primarily distance and online, but have in-person support where appropriate through learning centers and so on, or labs for students, plus selective in-person learner support. Be leading edge with technology, artificial intelligence, simulations, games, virtual reality, driven by pedagogy and access, making sure that students can access these technologies, but also making sure they're used for a sound educational purpose. I think open universities have much more freedom and much more motivation to experiment with these technologies than conventional universities. The third one is open to methods. Now here I think there is an opportunity for open universities. Traditional universities are very good at teaching content. They'll teach physics, they'll teach chemistry, they'll teach history. But what the world is looking for in a digital age are skills, particularly high-level intellectual skills like critical thinking, problem solving, independent learning, knowledge management. There's so much information out there. How do you find, access, analyze it, and so on? So an emphasis on 21st century skills development, a focus on quality online learning design. You're the experts in distance teaching methods, so you should have the best quality distance courses going, integrating both synchronous with asynchronous, with a strong pedagogical model that drives the use of each. Create dynamic, engaging online learning communities using past best practices combined with innovation and experimentation. I was really disappointed that during emergency remote learning, very few instructors used online discussion forums, for instance. They sometimes put people into Zoom breakout groups to discuss, but they underused the value of online discussion forums and so on. And further methods for open universities. And here is a big one. You have very large courses with lots of students, but what we're finding now is that content is changing quite rapidly. New skills are coming in all the time. And that means having a more agile course development process. Instead of having a big team sitting down designing a course, maybe an instructor with a course design template, access to open education resources and other online resources for instructors, like on how to make a good educational video, which they can just access and download. To enable more agile courses, get courses out more quickly and more relevant courses so that you've got a dynamic curriculum that's up to date all the time. And develop new alternative assessment methods. We saw in COVID that assessment online in emergency remote learning was very poor. It was very intrusive. Students often had to take a camera with them everywhere if they were doing an exam at home. The assessment methods were what I call 19th century assessment methods. They were testing memory and content and not skills. And so what we should be developing in open universities are authentic, continuous assessment, portfolio-based and skills-focused. A portfolio can show what students can do. They can go and practice what you've taught them, record it, and bring it back as their assessment, rather than having to sit down and do a paper and pencil exam. So I see open universities leading in the development of relevant 21st century assessment methods. And lastly, open to ideas. And I recognize I have to be a little bit careful here, given the political context in Turkey, but let's start with the less provocative ones. Relevant interdisciplinary programs. We have universities still are very much siloed in terms of subject disciplines, whereas in fact the world is looking for interdisciplinary solutions to climate change, international relations, aging, digital and media literacy, etc. Put on these courses that probably aren't available elsewhere in Turkey. Open universities have the opportunity to experiment with these kinds of programs. Look for international academic partnerships. I know you do that already, sharing courses and programs, academic exchange and joint research, joining, as you do, I know, the ICDE, European Distance Education Network, and linking with universities in other countries. I think it's really essential for open universities to have that kind of brotherhood, if I can put it that way, with other universities, not just open universities, but other universities that are into online learning or into innovation in teaching and learning and so on. I'll give you one example. This is Royal Roads University, which is a kind of open university in Canada. They're offering a program on climate change adaptation fundamentals, how you adapt to climate change, not how you stop it, but knowing it's going to happen, what do you do? It's the only course in Canada on that. And it's because they are focused mainly on lifelong learners, Royal Roads University, that is able to put on this kind of program more easily than a traditional university. And here are some examples of international partnerships. This is from Eden, European Distance Education Network. They have a whole range of programs, some on open education resources, some on open medical teaching, and so on. And partner with external enterprises, business associations, social and religious groups, and non-governmental organizations to support these organizations often in their training. Not necessarily delivering courses, but training them into how to offer courses in an open and flexible manner to their own people. I think there's a huge demand for this kind of program from outside of the university sector. And the main aim will be to keep Turkey an open and free society, and the open university indispensable for economic development. I think the two have to go together. I'll give you one example on partnerships. Athabasca University, they have partnership agreements with universities in Taiwan, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Spain. That's to give it an example of the range of partnerships that they have. And I think there's one other thing that's not covered by the four open elements of Geoffrey Crowther, because it didn't exist at the time, and that's the use of open educational resources. And I think there's definitely a role here, if you're not already a leader, in developing Turkish open education resources. One of the great problems of open education resources, these are educational materials that are free to anybody to use, either institutions or students, is that they're nearly all in English. And there's a great need to develop what I will call authentic open education resources that are relevant to the country in which they're used. And that means being in the language and reflecting the culture of the country, and not just taken from anywhere, particularly from the United States or Canada. I think you need your own open educational resources. And this should be available not just to your students, but to any student, anyone in Turkey. And here again is a big problem with a lot of open education resources elsewhere. The quality is not very good. It's often done with the best of intent by an individual instructor working alone. But good quality open educational resources needs not only good quality content, but usually good quality media production, good quality video, or if they're textual materials, good quality textual materials with good illustrations and so on. I'm not going to give a plug for one open education resource, and that's my own book called Teaching in a Digital Age. This has been translated into Turkish by two instructors, one from Ankara University and one from Muğla SK. And let me just say one thing about that book. I've written about 10 books altogether. The most books I ever sold through a commercial publisher was about 2,500 in 1 year. Teaching in a Digital Age has had 500,000 downloads. It's been translated into 10 different languages. That wouldn't have happened with a commercial book. And what's more, I can update it every year. I can keep it up to date. I can go online and just change it and so on. So open education resources are really important. But again, it's only one aspect of openness. It's an important aspect, but not the only one. So in conclusion, I see increasing competition for open universities. Access and the quality of online courses is an issue for those campus-based universities moving into online learning, if they've not done it before. Open universities need to concentrate on access and quality in online and distance programs. And don't forget also being open to ideas and methods, especially emerging technologies. And last of all, congratulations on 40 years of very successful open education. You are an amazing institution and you are known throughout the world, and deservedly so. So happy birthday. I hope I've got the Turkish right here. And questions. Do these four elements of openness also apply to Anadolu? Are there aspects of open that Anadolu, are there other aspects of open that Anadolu should pursue? What direction should Anadolu take in the future that is different from now, such as course design, type of students, use of technologies, etc.? So what are the next 40 years going to be like? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tony Bates. I think we can give a couple of minutes to our audience to think about your questions. And meanwhile, I would like to say that your observation was still valid. I mean, still, even in Turkey, we are good at in technology integration. However, I think when it comes to assessment and evaluation, we are still testing the memory of the learners, not their skill set. There is much to work on that aspect. And there are a couple of comments on the chat box, some of them written during your presentation. Serpil Koçtar says, at Anadolu Open Education System, courses are fully online. In the face-to-face system, courses are 40% online. Abdullah Cycle again, he says, at the Open Education System at Anadolu University, around 600 online courses are delivered each semester, utilizing both sync and async learning resources. And there is another comment from Ibrahim Bermish. He says, how can we access open educational resources on civil aviation? I think it is not a subject-dependent topic. And I also would like to tell that during the pandemic times, as Anadolu University, we are familiar with the term open educational resources and open educational practice. And we provided a lot of learning content as OER to most of the higher education institutions in Turkey. And we are proud to be one of the pioneer advocates of the openness in education. And most of our practices are focused on providing social justice, equity and equality in Turkish society as open, as a university with open education system.
Right. Yes, my worry when I prepared this presentation was I wasn't sure what I could tell you that you wouldn't already know, because you have so much experience in this field.
Yes, but still, you know, we should keep on advocating. Interestingly, in Turkey, because of the Anadolu University, open and distance learning has a 40 years anniversary, and thanks to you, now we are celebrating it, and this is part of the a larger organization, this webinar. But still, you know, some people still have some skepticism about open education or online distance education. And I see pandemic as a turning point. I mean, as long as we provide good quality online learning processes, I think we can achieve more.
Yes, and I think there's an irony that we have quality standards for online learning, but we don't really have quality standards for in-person teaching. And it's a double standard here that online learning is expected to be of a high quality, but we don't have the same expectations of in-person teaching. And that's partly to do, certainly in Canada, with the reward system. Most professors are rewarded for their research, not for their teaching. And while that's still the dominant driver of promotion, research, it's hard to get professors' attention. Now, my experience is that most professors want to do a good job teaching, but they have to balance the demands of research, administration, and teaching. And often they don't get rewarded for spending time on improving their teaching. It's the research that gets them the promotion. And that's a big structural problem for regular universities.
I think this is the same case in Turkey. I mean, for promotion, you need to do more research, and your teaching practices are, I mean, has a secondary importance. And there is just one final comment I would like to read to you and to all our audience. Elif Toprak says, open science is another important dimension of our institution, needs to consider that shall also feed in different ideas and methods to cope with the challenge in the higher education ecosystem. And I think, yeah, open science is another term that has gained a lot of importance during the pandemic. And we've seen that institutions and even countries shared their knowledge to find a cure, to find the vaccination for COVID-19 pandemic. And actually, we also see by experience the value of cooperation and sharing. And as we all know, open education or OER also has the main motivation with sharing. I mean, sharing knowledge, sharing experiences, sharing love, for a better word.
Sharing. Yes.
Do you have any other comments? Dr. Tony Bates, would you like to say anything else, or we can end our webinar?
No, I wish you all the best for the future. I really hope that we'll be able to start traveling again so we can exchange ideas in person. Or as much as I like virtual learning, I think it has its limitations. I would very much like to have come to celebrate 40 years of your university in person and get a feel of the culture of the country and the food of the country and so on, which you can't do at a distance. But nevertheless, I think you have another 40 years of glory ahead of you.
Thank you, Dr. Tony Bates, for sharing your thoughts and vision on open universities. It was great to host you online as a part of 40 years anniversary, and we all hope that the next time we will host you in person here at Anadolu University.
And I would like to say a few words. Dr. Bates, thank you very much for your contribution and this great presentation. I hope we will have opportunities to meet you in person and in other events. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I look forward to learning more about Anadolu University in the future as well. Thank you very much.
Herkese teşekkürler. Etkinliğimiz sona ermiştir.
Teşekkür ederiz Aras Hocam.
Ben teşekkür ederim hocam katkılarınız için.